Kia ora, I'm Nadine Higgins and welcome to your personal finance podcast, The Prosperity Project. I am on a mission to empower you financially. And while I work in finance, I'm a columnist, a journalist, an investor, a financial advisor, and a mum of two. I do not claim to be the font of all knowledge. So each week I'll be bringing in the experts from across the world of finance and beyond to find out all the things you and I need to know. And if you want to get your questions in front of those experts, please email them to me, nadine.higgins at nzherald.co.nz. Today, we're focusing on divorce, and even if you're happily loved up right now, and maybe especially if you're happily loved up right now, this is worth listening to, because we all know that till death do us part doesn't always end up that way, and divorce can be financially devastating. So joining us with ways to navigate its stresses is Enable Me financial advisor Shelley Palman. Hi, Shelley.
Hello.
So we're going to step through some of the things you need to know and the things you might not know that you need to know. But let's start big picture. I can only imagine what's going through your head at a time like this, but where do you start with your approach to navigating divorce?
Yeah, and we don't want it to be a situation where the only one who's winning is your lawyer. So I would say bite your tongue, put your kid gloves on. You're entering into a period of negotiation that's going to involve conflicting priorities and competing priorities with yourself and your partner. So bite your tongue and be amicable and just show grace over this period, because the more you argue and bicker, it can just take a lot longer and you can't move on. So, at what price? Peace of mind. So underpinning all of this, just swallow your words and just be patient as you kind of navigate this through. I think that would be my first piece of advice.
Which must be the hardest piece of advice to follow, because, emotions are running high.
Extremely high.
The person who probably knows you best, and they might be hurting you and you think they've done something wrong. They think you've done something wrong. You're relitigating old hurts. Like, how on earth do you bite your tongue and keep calm?
It's hard. Have a trusted, family member or friend that you can vent to, but any comms that you have with your ex-partner, just keep it really, really nice so that you can navigate this period with the minimum of disruption, because the quicker you can come to what we call your matrimonial settlement or your separation agreement, which is that legal document that you need to go through, dividing up all the assets, the sooner you get that done and agreed and organised and actually executed upon, the quicker you can move on and start to heal.
Well, and I guess it's excellent financial advice to say find a friend to vent to, because if you vent to your lawyer, it's only going to cost
they charge you.
They're charging you by 6-minute increments.
Yeah.
So keep it efficient.
Keep it efficient with your lawyer. And I think try and agree as much as you possibly can between the two of you conceptually, and then you go to the lawyers. Because the lawyers will draft up, and generally what happens is, practically speaking, is that one lawyer will draft up the agreement, and then that will get sent to the other person's lawyer to then pick holes in it and, fight for their client, or, they need to make sure that their client is coming out okay and that all of the letter of the law is being abided by. But there will be two lawyers involved, and each party needs to be represented by a different lawyer. But in practice, one person's lawyer does the drawing up of the agreement, and the other one kind of refines it until everyone agrees.
Right. So the longer that goes on, the more it costs. So word to the wise.
Costly from a financial and mental health point of view.
Yes.
Yeah, the longer things linger. And it's all very negative, isn't it? You've come through a separation, nobody's feeling very good about it. You don't want to move on too quickly, but let's just get through that period with grace, and with the minimum of disruption, so then you can kind of start to plan your life moving forward. So before we wanted to kind of talk about some of the practical things that you would instantly need to kind of do or know. And I think one of the first things I say, on both sides of the fence is understand the assets and the liabilities of the relationship. So that's from a financial perspective, that's your first port of call. And it amazes me. I sometimes see a person coming to see me for an initial consultation, and I'll say to them, what are you expecting to leave with? And they have no idea the value of the house, the value of the mortgage, how many cars they own, or the other party's KiwiSaver balance. balance.
They don't know how many cars they own?
No, I mean like the values of the cars, you know, and yeah. So it's like understand that first, you know, or if you know it's rocky and you're sort of seeing the writing on the wall, get a really good understanding of, as a relationship or as a partnership, what are the joint assets? And everything is joint with the exception of things that have been given to you as a gift. So say, for example, an engagement ring, that is not relationship property. An inheritance is not relationship property unless it's been intermingled in a joint bank account. So get a feel for, you know, generally for most people, it's the house. You know, it's the house, the Kiwi Savers, the cars, any other boats, caravans, you know, physical assets that you own, less any debt on those assets. And that's what we call your net asset position. So that's your starting point as a family, as a couple. What is that number? Then you divide it by 2.
Right. And we'll get to the division of that and how that shakes down. But I guess it's also something worth doing if everything is peachy keen at the moment. You should still be working out, or at least having a grasp of, what you owe and what you own. Like, that's
so true.
Both parties' responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right, Nadine. And even if everything's going okay in the relationship, I always say to people who come and see me for the first time and have that initial consultation, I'm actually clocking as a couple, what is their net asset position, you know, and you should be at a certain point by a certain age, unless you've made a big mistake or you're terrible with money. So, you know, as a couple, generally, you know, by age and you're kind of in your 40s, we should be looking at about $1 million of net equity. So that means possibly you own a $1.5 million house, if you live in Auckland, with a $500,000 mortgage, then, you know, that's $1 million worth of equity in your home. Does that make sense?
It does. And I imagine that there's a bit of a sharp intake of breath from some people being like, oh, I've been left behind. I'm not at that position at this age. But the first step is to understand it, right?
Yes.
I guess one side of that equation is the debt. Is that something that you have to be a bit careful about when you're separating? If you've got access to credit, say it's the credit card, the revolving credit, hire purchase accounts, whatever, do we need to be a bit careful that one party isn't going to go on a spending spree for debt we are both responsible for?
Yeah, that's a risk. And I think if you've decided to separate, in that separation agreement, ultimately, there'll be a separation date, which was essentially when both of you decided, yeah, we don't want to be together anymore. And the separation date, that is where you should record the assets and the liabilities. So if there is any, so write that down, you know, like if you are in a relationship and you guys have decided, you know, a couple of months ago to separate, but like market's not so great, so we'll put the house on the market in spring or whatever, we should be dividing up the assets less any liabilities as at the date of separation. So I would just make a note of that. So what is the house worth? How much is our mortgage at that point? If there is a revolving credit or a credit card, what is the balance of that revolving credit or credit card? So then you've got some sort of proof that, you know, that person incurred those transactions after that date and that wasn't in relation to anything to do with you. So you've got a bit of a chance maybe of that being evened up in the wash up.
Speaking of the house, I guess typically one party has to move out, and that might cost, or you might go crash on someone else's couch or move back in with your parents, I don't know. But one person's getting the benefit of living in the house that you both own or are paying the bank back for. How do you make that fair?
Yeah, and the person that remains in the house, and it's I guess it's all up for negotiation, but something for someone who is still left in the house to be aware of is that they're actually due to pay what we call occupational rent to that other person. So the market value of whatever that house could be rented out for, divided by 2. You know, and you're sort of entitled really to pay that person. It's a little unfair where and do you know what? It's often the person who decides to leave who actually moves out of the house. Not always, but, you know, they kind of feel like, well, I made the call, I'm the bad person, you know, I'm going to get out of here and just leave that person in the house. And they might come to an agreement, you know, between the two of them to say, well, I'll let you live here for a certain period of time rent-free. That can also be arranged. You can agree anything and put it in writing. But yeah, strictly speaking, you should be paying that person rent because that house, you know, if you both moved out, that house could be rented and you would each get half.
Without wanting to be too morbid, If relations have broken down and that person is the beneficiary of my life insurance or my will, like, do I need to change that in an awful hurry?
Absolutely. That should be the first thing you do. Because, if you no longer hold affection for that person and you're not really wanting to kind of take care of their welfare moving forward, that's a phone call to your lawyer pretty quickly to take them off your will. Particularly, where there's children involved and, if something happens to you, you would want any of your wealth to go to your children. So that generally is what I would advise. And that can be done pretty quickly. The life insurance, that's a phone call to your insurance broker. And, the life insurance would be paid out to your own estate, which would then get distributed as per the terms of your will.
I guess it's normal that people have their finances very intermingled. Maybe they've got joint bank accounts, joint credit cards. When you decide to leave or someone else leaves, should you be going and setting up your own immediately? Is that an urgent concern?
Not urgent, but I just would, and if you want to maybe get on some dating apps after you get back on the wagon, you don't really want your partner seeing those
Shelley
transactions
is not
coming
mucking
through.
About.
In all in good time, but there might be things that you want to do that you don't want your ex-partner seeing coming through on your bank statement. So generally speaking, I would recommend my clients set up their own personal account, and you can get your pay. You can ask your payroll department to put your pay into that individual account. You might like to have an individual sort of weekly spend account, so you get a feel for your individual numbers. And I think that starts to speak to what you could do moving forward to really help yourself feel empowered around your finances, when you're on your own. And so starting to kind of operate individually and getting an understanding of your individual ins and outs, like your income and expenses versus your joint expenses, is actually an area that we need to start to move into pretty quickly if we're looking to kind of forge a life moving forward on our own.
Yeah, and on that note, I guess, look, I know that you're not a lawyer, but you do have some experience of this both personally and with working with your clients. One of those income and expenses things we need to get our heads around is the kids, if you have them, right? And so there will often be a custody arrangement and potentially some child support. How do you get a handle on what you might be entitled to or what you might have to pay? Is there a way to estimate that before you're kind of in the thick of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage when you're still together and you can have joint bank accounts, hopefully, and visibility of what that other person is earning. So it's really good to have an understanding of their earnings versus your earnings, because you can actually go online to the IRD website and there's the child support calculator that you can do. And it involves popping in your income, their income, and any custody arrangements. And it's generally done on a per fortnight basis. So how many days do you have the children per fortnight versus that other person? So it kind of does this convoluted calculation in the background. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it's good to get an understanding of what you might be liable for moving forward. Again, kind of me skipping ahead, there's a consideration around, will you have to take on a mortgage yourself? And if you are entitled to child support, some banks will take that as income. So it's one thing understanding, well, what is my individual budget going to be, but also what could I individually possibly borrow to help myself, moving forward with my plans.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about the moving forward financial piece in just a second. But the other thing I really want to understand, because it was a concept I had not come across until I started having friends looking at divorce, was spousal maintenance. What is that? And when might you be entitled to it?
Yeah, so spousal maintenance is very much open for negotiation. So child support it's in law. There is a whole law around this, what your entitlements are. That said, with child support, you can also negotiate a private child support arrangement where you might get more or less, or agree to whatever, but it's embedded in law. With the spousal maintenance, the intention really is for the party that had maybe taken time out or taken on the bulk of kind of the child rearing. It's designed, or the intention of that spousal maintenance is, it's designed to help them get back on their feet over a short period of time. So generally it would be sort of between 2 to 5 years max, I think. and any lawyers can probably correct me on that. But for myself personally, it was a period of 2 years. There was a spousal maintenance payment in acknowledgement of the fact that I'd taken time out of the workforce and needed to kind of build my career back up a little bit and increase my income. And it just gave me that grace to be able to do that over that period of time.
So should you be pushing for that to be as high as possible? Is that a negotiation point? Like, hey, if you're getting the baby grand piano, I need more spousal maintenance.
And it may come down to that. It may come down to, there's a couch or a bed or a grand piano that we're trying to, negotiate who gets what. But yeah, I think it's like any contract negotiation, you need to understand what your needs are before you start negotiating. So that's why I say, gather all the information you can. Should I be paying occupational rent? How much would I be entitled to in terms of child support? How much do I actually own, assets less liabilities, and then 50% of that, give or take? What are those numbers? Because that'll actually help you through that negotiation period, understand what you're needing to kind of push for. And so when I've worked with clients in the past, when they're going through a divorce, we start to track their personal spend. We start to understand if they need to take on a mortgage or not, because possibly they're not walking away with enough from the house to buy another house freehold. So knowing all of those numbers helps you to understand what you should be asking for the likes of spousal maintenance and, possibly some extra child support, because just because the IRD says this is what you're entitled to doesn't mean that that's going to give your children the life that they've become accustomed to. So the knowing of the numbers piece is actually almost where you need to go first to then do the negotiation around, what you might get out of the marriage separation agreement.
And we need to take a quick break, but after that break, we're going to talk about the piece after you've divvied up the assets, starting over, and what it is you need to be thinking about to get back on your feet. Back soon. Welcome back to the Prosperity Project. We're talking to Enable Me financial advisor Shelley Palman about recovering financially from divorce. Shelley, once we've divided up the assets, we know how much we're walking away with, what we've had to concede, we know what the child support is. What are the next steps you need to take to recover? Because I'm imagining for most people, when you have what you've got, there's a bit of recovering to do.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, it's a massive event. It's a life-changing, game-changing, everything-changing event. And it just throws everything up in the air, And I think on the positive side of that, it allows you to kind of reflect on what's important to you and kind of sit down and go, well, now that I'm on my own and I'm steering the ship moving forward, what is it that I want? And I think that's a bit of a unique opportunity, even though it's a terrible thing that you've been through. Hey, what a beautiful opportunity to design your life moving forward.
It's actually a really nice way of reframing it, and it makes it sound very empowering. Hey, I am in the driver's seat rather than I am on my own.
Absolutely. You could buy those pink throws and that feminine art now, It's what do I want my
pillows that every man hates. You can have 12 of them on your bed if you want.
Yeah, exactly. And so sitting down and kind of going, well, how do I want my life to be? What's really important to me? What are my goals? What are my priorities? And kind of put that in writing, I feel, journal that, because now we start to go, well, that's what I would like my life to look like. Now I have to kind of financially make that work. So you've got that understanding of, okay, well, this is 50%, or, some people can negotiate a little bit more than 50%. Very rare for it to be much more than 55% of the matrimonial property. But once we're understanding those numbers, it's kind of like, okay, well, this is what I've got. In all likelihood, you're taking on a mortgage to buy that property that you're going to live in. In all likelihood, that property is going to need to be a lot more modest, possibly, than what you've come from. Even if you do have children and have to house them, it's maybe in a more modest area or smaller or on a cross lease as opposed to a freehold or whatever. But how much is that mortgage needing to be? And it's kind of like a puzzle. It's like, okay, this is the amount that I've got to work with. This is the house that I would like. And the in-between bit is what you need to go to the bank for. And so,
which I guess comes back to how much you need to earn to be able to qualify and service a mortgage of that size.
Yeah.
Which for some people, like in the experience that you described, if you've been the one to take time out of the workforce or perhaps you're working part-time, that might not be the number that you need it to be to qualify.
And generally, most people are working in some way, shape or form. If you're not working, you're going to need to, I'm afraid. But there's
hard facts, yep.
Hard facts, saying it like it is. But there'll be that missing link between what your income is. Possibly you can stack some child support or spousal maintenance for a period of time on top of that. But there's likely to be a gap in terms of what you need to lift your income to be to, say, get yourself ahead. And you've been through this massive life-changing event. You're going to need to be smarter moving forward. You've lost time. You've lost time now, and you need to get to the same end result, or you need to land at retirement, and you have less time. So we need to be smarter moving forward.
Yeah, you're going to need to do things double time. You mentioned tacking on the spousal maintenance or the child support to what you are able to earn. In your experience, will the bank factor that in if you want to borrow for a mortgage?
Good question. They don't factor in, that I'm aware of, the spousal maintenance piece, because it is designed to be very short term, so they know it's going to end. And some banks will sometimes factor in child support for a while, and they did in my case. I had children who were aged 9 and 7, so there is an entitlement to child support that goes until those children are 18. So that's kind of a known fact at that point that the bank feel that they can rely on. But for some people, if their children are a wee bit older, like they're sort of 15 and 17, the bank may not take that into account. So you're going to need to lift your earnings to get the level of lending to allow you to buy that property, that next property.
That makes sense. I'm wondering, though, if you are the party who maybe didn't know what it is you owed and owned, you were financially disempowered because you didn't want to know, or your partner told you that they're better at that than you, how do you get your confidence back? Because surely that's one of the things that underpins this recovery, is we have to feel confident in our own ability to take the wheel.
You're so right. And I have a really good example of a lady that I met. She was actually the breadwinner and an incredibly intelligent woman. She handed over the reins to her husband. She went to work and she worked really hard. She earned really well. She had no idea of what was going on with their finances. So she put herself in a really vulnerable position, and I would never recommend that, for these people that are kind of, if they think there may be a separation coming up, or there's a few signs, or the marriage feels rocky, get in there and understand your position. You make yourself really vulnerable. So she had to really, I told her to go away actually and come back to me once she had a better handle on things, because she just exposed herself massively.
So if you're listening, this is your warning not to do that. And also, if you start seeing your partner showing new fervour when it comes to the family finances, maybe
get worried.
The health of your relationship. On that note then, what have you seen with your clients as to those who have navigated divorce well or not?
One example I can think of, other than the lady who didn't just totally let the reins to her husband who wasn't working and she was working, was someone who actually did have a really good idea of, and this was a client, she actually did have a really good idea of what was going on. She had a really good handle on the finances, and I actually helped her feel empowered and navigate through the separation agreement. So we were able to put together a plan A, a plan B, a plan C for her as she navigated the negotiation of the separation agreement.
So what does that look like? Is it like, okay, if we get this much, we can afford this property. If we get this much, that's off the table.
Exactly
the kids are sharing a bedroom.
Exactly that. And it was so helpful for her, because people get stuck on, I want to have more than 50% and I'm going to try and go him forever, or him or her for more than 50%, and they get really hung up on it. And, when you can have a plan and a go forward plan, and we have, an ideal plan, and then we have our fallback plan B, and we have another one, and it would be okay if, it helps them to kind of navigate that negotiation and kind of put it in its place and go, well, why am I fighting over an extra $20,000 that I might get out of the matrimonial property when I can actually just buy this cute house over here, get mortgage free on it in 12 years and move on with my life? It makes that negotiation and that negativity seem less important, and you realize I'm just bickering and fighting over a very small amount of money when I could actually focus on an amazing go forward here.
Well, I guess if you can actually visualize what that 50%, where it lands you, then that's different, right?
Yeah.
You're not focusing on the things you've left behind, you're focusing on what's ahead.
And what you're capable of achieving moving forward. And I think for me personally, this was the one thing that helped me feel really great about the whole situation. Like I actually kind of feel like we kind of cruised through it. Well, I feel like I cruised through, what can be a very tumultuous time, because I had about 9 different scenarios, Nadine.
9. That doesn't surprise me. 9. Ellie, it doesn't surprise me.
And a spreadsheet. And do you know what the kicker was? I was happy with each of those 9 different scenarios. And so I was able myself, I guess, to using my skills as a financial planner to go, well, if this is what I'm likely to, because remember, you have to also sell a house generally. And so you don't quite know what you might get for that house. So there's also that in the mix as well. So you can kind of go, well, if we sell the house for X conservatively, this is what I would walk away with if it were X split, 50-50 or 55-45 or whatever. And this would be the amount of spousal maintenance and child support that I would receive. You can work through these different scenarios with a financial planner to understand whether or not that's likely to work. And if it's not likely to work, then you can kind of go back and go, well, what do I need to address here? What is the missing piece of the puzzle? Do I need more of a deposit, or do I need to, get more out of the separation, or do I need to lift my income, or ask for a longer period of spousal maintenance? Or it helps you to design the separation agreement to serve you for your future plan.
It's really interesting, because I would have presumed that most people would say, I'll go and see a financial advisor or a mortgage broker or a real estate agent or whatever once I have my full and final settlement. But what you're saying is if you take that advice a little bit sooner, then it can help maybe speed up or at least smooth the process.
Yes. Or they might come to us after the fact, and I would sit there, and you know me, I call a spade a spade. I wish you'd just negotiated for a little bit more, X, Y, or Z out of that, because now we don't quite have enough income to get you a mortgage, And so I would recommend that people come and seek advice earlier, even if it doesn't result in an ongoing relationship, in a planning program. It might be just some tips and tricks to kind of go, well, this is what I need to be thinking about. And actually, it's not looking that great. I really need to push for more in this area so that I know I'm going to be okay out of this moving forward. And then you can go away and then negotiate that and then come back once it's agreed and we've got a bit more certainty.
Look, I know that you're in a relationship again now, and that I get that's wonderful, but, and I'm sure we could do an entire podcast episode on this, it's intermingling finances after you've just divvied everything up. Well, maybe not just. I don't know how many years in the intervening period. I won't cast aspersions, Shelley.
Thank you.
But, how do you navigate being smarter about looking after what's yours and planning for the potential without sabotaging a new relationship, assuming it will fail?
And it's terrible, isn't it? Because you never want to enter into a relationship thinking that it might fail. You can't. You do need to put your heart on the line again and go into it, and you can't think that I'm doing this and it might end. That's a terrible way to enter. So, and having been through a separation and all of the associated trauma with that, there is that guardedness entering into a new relationship thinking, well, what if this happens again? Statistics aren't that great, I'm afraid, for the second time round couples out there. But I think it's actually worse, that the separation or divorce rate with second time round couples, than it is with a first time marriage. But I think I would always advise just be really upfront from the start. Have that conversation with your partner. In my mind, it's a red flag if they don't want to talk about it. So pretty much within the first couple of months, if you see this being a little serious, I would be planting lightly some seeds around, a relationship property agreement, what commonly is called a prenup. That's protective in terms of what you might in future bring into the relationship, you would then walk away with again should the worst happen. So, it's just having those light conversations, well, you've been through a breakup, so have I. How would you feel about a prenup? Sound them out about it, because I would want you to have one. So if they're resistant to that, then we might want to run a mile.
I'm laughing because it doesn't sound like a light conversation, but I suppose if you just keep it light, then maybe that's the key.
Just peppering in a few little peppercorns. And how would you feel if?
Yes.
Do you know what this is?
Even if it's not comfortable, doesn't mean it's not important, right? And hopefully once bitten, twice shy.
And actually as well, Nadine, you have to be comfortable in having uncomfortable conversations with your partner. And money is one of those things. Like, you've got to be open and honest about it, even in current relationships. There's so much, as we see as financial coaches, money personalities, willpower around money, how they're likely to behave. And if you've come out of a relationship where you may have had really conflicting money personalities with your ex, do you want to kind of repeat that again with the next partner?
Yeah. All of that. And finances can really put pressure on a relationship. And so, sorting through all these things is important. And I love that, how you put that you have to be able to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations with your spouse. And this is one of those conversations. Hey, you just mentioned a little earlier that, when you're dividing everything you own partway through your life, it means you have to go a little faster out the other side to land where you need to in the long term. What does that look like?
Yeah, getting ahead faster, rowing in faster in the right direction kind of thing. So if you are lucky enough and are able to stay on the property ladder after that separation, that looks like getting mortgage free as fast as possible. It looks like investing so that you're going to have enough for retirement. And I would go so far as to say that if you enter into a second time round relationship, you need to make that same amount of progress that you would have on your own, particularly with your second time round partner if they have children or you have children. Because if something happens to one of you, in all likelihood, the other person is going to want to look after their children. So you might again end up with half a house. If something really terrible happens to your new partner, you may walk away with half a house again.
Gosh, I hadn't even thought of that, but obviously you have, because it's...
Me either, until now.
Yeah. Look, there's so much to navigate when it comes to divorce. And I think you put it perfectly right at the beginning of our chat, that it is like a Mack truck ploughing through your life, and it affects so many things. Even when you've got it all figured out the other side, it continues to have a lasting impact. So thank you for calling a spade and stepping us through some of the things that we need to think about.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to The Prosperity Project. You can follow this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and please do chuck us a rating or a review while you're there. For more personal finance and business content, head to nzherald.co.nz, and please do feel free to get in touch with your questions and your stories. nadine.higgins at nzme.co.nz. A reminder, though, that this podcast is informational only, and nothing we say here should be considered personalised financial advice. But also remember that while listening to this podcast is hopefully going to be additive to your financial knowledge, and that is fantastic, knowing stuff doesn't create change. Doing stuff does. So what action are you going to take today to make your life more prosperous? My producer for this episode is Ethan Sills. Sound engineer is Richard Martin. I'm Nadine Higgins. Thanks for listening to The Prosperity Project.
Brought to you by moneyfit.me.